Okay. The combination, so another thing with basin design, I'll go into real quick. Algae can grow on the sides. If it's too, if the slope isn't great enough, you'll get algae, you'll have problems with aquatic plants. So that's where the 8 feet comes in. That's where this 2-to-1 ratio comes in. If it's too steep though, it could be a safety hazard. Pets, wildlife, kids. So that's the balance that we're striking here. And I'll get through these pretty quick here. I think. Okay, so maintenance, woody vegetation, remove that from around outlet structures. Check the outlet. So these can become plugged. That bag at the bottom, it resulted in like 3 phone calls, flooding, and all kinds of problems. And it all came down to a bag that got stuck in the outlet structure. We can check depth, monitor sediment accumulation, control algae, but realize it's not a swimming pool. You will have some, so it doesn't have to be. Yeah. So lastly, before we turn it over to Alex, some of the services we offer, we have a castable depth finder, so we can get a basic idea of the depth of the pond. We can help with, our technicians can help with pond location. If you have a site and want to know, hey, is this a good site for a pond? We can give you that first line of, first decision. Maybe that's not such a good site, or yes, it's good. Algae ID, we can do some basic algae ID, like figure out maybe if it's a HAB forming organism or not. And lastly, water quality. So we can check basic water quality parameters or suggest tests that you could do on your own to help monitor it, just like a pool. And with that, we'll get ready to transition over. I think that's yes. So we'll transition over. Alex Race with, Jones Lake Management. And Alex, myself, and Justin all went to Miami University. And Alex has a degree in zoology and great program there. Started his career with Jones Lake Management 15 years ago, has worked in all aspects of the business, including fish stocking, pond and lake treatments, fisheries improvement, and nutrient mitigation. Now, working as a business developer based in Cincinnati, he focuses on driving growth and building strong client relations across the region. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and introduce Alex.
All right, I'm going to take over here. Okay, does that work? Nope, this one. All right, everybody see my screen there with the presentation? Okay, great. I'll go ahead and get started here. All right, first of all, thanks to Warren County, Travis, and Justin there for having me with this chat. And then thank you all for taking time out of your day to kind of spend some time with us here to kind of go over, pond management issues, which is what I'm going to focus on. Feel free to stop, ask questions as you need to. You can throw stuff in the chat. Travis and Justin can kind of keep an eye on that, and they can throw it to me if any questions come up or anything like that. But, feel free to stop me. We can kind of keep this, back and forth a little bit too, but there should be time at the end for questions as well. So again, going to go over, kind of common pond management issues that I've seen in my career and what we deal with as a company across our footprint here. And then, we kind of see what kind of common issues we found about our company here. So Jones Lake Management, the property that we sit on. So if you're not aware, we are, at least a piece of our business is a fish hatchery here in the Cincinnati region. We're on the east side of town in a little tiny village called Newtown, kind of in the Anderson, Batavia area out that way. But this has been a fish farm for a really, really long time. So they built this as a state-run hatchery back in the 20s. So you can see that image there. That's from the 40s. And really looking at it, a site that I come to every single day, it doesn't look too far off from that now. But it was really primarily set as a hatchery because we have a natural spring. At the up very front at our property, we have kind of a concrete raceway that kind of funnels that spring activity, and that spring runs all the time, 24/7, 365. It can get a little bit slow in times of drought, but it pretty much flows nice, cool, fresh spring water through this entire property, which obviously is really great for trying to raise fish. So we're not having to recirculate and filter. All that water is basically comes in the through the spring there and then flushes out through the creek on the backside of the property. So it's constantly flushing out. So it makes it a very unique site. So our founder Rob Jones and his brother started the company back in the mid to late 80s. There, they started actually in a garage up in the Dayton area, and then eventually they found this property in 1989, which they purchased from the state. And you can see there on the left of kind of what it looked like early on in the process, kind of a little bit of a train wreck. So lots of cleanup, repairing the ponds so they could hold fish, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, some infrastructure things. And then on the right is what we're looking at as our property currently. So you can see more outbuildings, bigger warehouse space. The ponds look a lot cleaner. Obviously, a lot more built for holding fish, for our larger production scale that we do today. So we have 20 production ponds. All of these ponds that you see here holding fish, we're harvesting out of there pretty consistently throughout the growing season. Most ponds will have individual species that we're trying to grow out. And then we'll harvest them with a large seine net as required throughout the season, basically. So we have crews that are working basically 24/7 on keeping those fish harvested and ready for our customers out for stock. As a history, Travis mentioned I've been with the company 15 years. And in those 15 years, as a company, we've expanded like crazy. We started here in the Cincinnati area. This is, where we built the business, but we've built out these satellite locations, basically throughout the whole eastern side of the country here. All these locations are satellite locations. They don't have a fish farm, obviously. But this is more headquarters for our lake management services, aeration and fountain installation, all the sort of services that we offer, which I'll get into a little bit more today. But all the fish are still running out of our Cincinnati location, and we'll just move fish through. I think we're stocking, probably upwards of 10 states at this point, and they all run out of this Cincinnati office here. But you can see, short period of time, a lot of growth. This is all natural, organic growth, promoting managers from within to move to different areas to run these locations. We've also grown by partnering with other companies throughout the country there. This is kind of a list of all the companies that we've partnered over this short period of time of about 3 years, starting with ATAC, which a lot of you, if you're from the Warren County area, may recognize that name. That was a fish farm up in the South Lebanon, Oregonia area that did have a small fish production facility. They did lake management services, all that sort of stuff. So all of their employees are now part of the Jones brand. We retained a lot of those customers. And really the best part is maintaining those employees that have, varied experience. So, and you look down this list and they range anywhere from, up in the Lebanon area, up to Michigan, to Wisconsin, to Alabama. And really the highlight of this slide is just showing, the importance that we have on, varied experience from all throughout the country. Each one of these companies has, employees that have been, in the field, in the industry for a really long time. And they also have varied service offerings, that maybe core Jones Fish back in the day didn't offer, but now more available, whether it's large scale dredging, airboat, harvesters, all this sort of stuff. So it just kind of expands our product offering, and I think overall is going to help expand our knowledge base that we can use to help clients throughout our entire footprint here. And now here's kind of an image of kind of what we've grown into today. So 225 plus, I'd say we're well over 250 kind of at this point. The core of the business is 35 plus years, but you can kind of see each one of those dots is kind of a satellite location for us there, as well as our home location here in Cincinnati. But you can see what coverage we have now in the across this whole southern eastern side of the country here. And this is just in the span of, basically as long as I've been here, about 15 years. So very, very quickly growth rate. But it just kind of expands our service offerings and our footprint. And again, I think it ends up helping even locally our customers just from our expanded base of knowledge and all that sort of stuff. So we'll get kind of into the services that we offer there. This is just kind of a little snapshot of all the services that we offer here. A lot of you might be familiar with, the fish stocking side of it and the algae and weed control service that we offer, but we do much, much more than that. Whether it's mechanical harvesting, we have drones that we can do applications with, water clarification, we're doing cattail removals, we can do pond liner installations, mappings. Travis mentioned doing some of the mappings and depth surveys on their end. We also have a sonar system where we can create these nice looking bathymetric maps to kind of see all the different contours and the depths, throughout the entire water body there. We can do muck surveys. If you're thinking that the pond is starting to get to the point where it needs to be dredged, we can kind of evaluate that and make our recommendations from there. And then also offer the services for whether it's targeted or full scale dredging with our equipment there as well. So, kind of a little bit of a snapshot of what we can offer, but, we're not just a company that's selling fish. Aside from building the ponds, we do everything after that point for maintaining the ponds through this region, basically. All right, now kind of getting the nitty gritty of kind of what I'm here to talk about, which is going to be common lake issues that we see throughout this area and what I deal with and our team deals with on a daily basis there. These are kind of the highlights of what I'm going to be going over. So noosis, algae, and weed control, that we see, on a day-to-day basis. The HABs, which Travis quickly mentioned there as well, cyanobacteria blooms, which can be problematic for toxicity issues, especially if you're dealing with HOA ponds, development ponds, parks and recreation ponds, that sort of stuff. You can see where that can be extremely problematic if you're dealing with potential toxic blooms there. So we'll get into a little bit of where that comes from and kind of how to mitigate that. Excess nutrients, big problem, especially in our region here where we have a lot of farmland, fertilizers, even HOAs that are using, landscape companies to do fertilization and stuff like that. All that has an effect, as those products move downstream and into these water bodies. We have to be able to understand where that's coming from and really how to combat that to help cut a lot of these issues here. And then muck accumulation, that's obviously a big thing, with keeping that sedimentation out of there. Occasionally you do have to remove those sediments. There are alternative ways as well, but a lot of times the classic, of mechanically removing that stuff is going to be key for sure. And then I'll get a little bit into fishery stuff that might not be as important to a lot of people on the call today, but it does help with a lot of different things that you might not think about. It's not always just recreation. Sometimes it can help with other factors in problems and issues that we're kind of going to go over a little bit here too. So first and foremost, we'll start on a little bit of algae and weed control background here. I kind of pulled out, just common issues that we see pretty regularly, and first and foremost is going to be, your algae species. That's a vast majority of problems that we see. Very, very common species, and there's lots of species of filamentous algae. But on a common scheme, we'll see a lot of these floating mats. Get lots and lots of calls about this. Probably if you have a pond in your community or the entities that you're dealing with, you're gonna see algae growth. The algae can grow in a 5-gallon bucket with a little bit of sunlight and water in there. So it doesn't take much for that stuff to really, really take over. And it's not always problematic, a little bit of algae isn't the worst thing in the world, but the problem with algae is it just continues to grow as we get further and further through the season. So certainly starting early with some sort of mitigation technique is going to be important before it starts to cover the whole thing, and then you can get into bigger issues there. But that filamentous algae species of whatever variety will form these really, really dense mats that you'll see on the surface, but typically they'll start on the bottom. for the most part. So they'll grow, in these layers, even matted up on the bottom. And then as it kind of gets a little bit larger, you get more sunlight, the water temperature warms up. It'll use, gas exchange to kind of float up to the surface there. And that's where you see all those mats floating up at the surface for a lot of times. Typically, you'll start really early in the season. You can even see this stuff growing throughout the winter time. Even if we have ice, you can see it growing under the ice. So different species can grow under different conditions. But we'll typically start with mitigation treatments of whatever magnitude we do, starting typically in March or April for this area. So that's really when you start to see it kick into full gear there. Another algae species that we see a lot in this area is called Chara. Looks very, very vascular. I mean, it looks like it could be a weed species, and it's commonly mistaken for a submerged weed species a lot of times, but it actually is a more evolved algae species that kind of mimics that vegetation that you see a lot of times growing off the bottom. But if you were to pull it out, it's not rooted to anything. You can break it apart really easily, and then it becomes pretty clear that it's not really a rooted vegetation there. We'll typically see it in hard water ponds. It kind of has that gritty feel to it, and that gritty feel comes from calcium deposits that it's pulling from the pond, which is why you see it in harder water ponds, because it's using those minerals to kind of form that outer layer of that organism there. I kind of put a note about water clarity, because it actually is pretty good at improving your water clarity. If a pond has a really bad Chara growth, or even just moderate Chara growth, you'll see some pretty clear water usually. So this is typically a species that we may not want to completely eradicate, just kind of keep it in check. Also is decent for fish habitat and stuff like that as well. So just kind of a little bit of a balance there, but it could actually improve the health of the pond overall. But it can certainly get really, really out of control where it's topping out in large mats up at the surface. So at that point, obviously, we want to do something with some level of control there. HABs, harmful algal blooms, is what that stands for, which is a little bit misleading because most of these species that we label harmful algal blooms are not technically algae, actually. They tend to be more the cyanobacteria species. But for, most common purposes, harmful algal blooms is a perfectly fine term for a lot of this stuff. Typically what you'll see with these is films on the surface of all kinds of different colors. You'll see these bright greens, you'll see reds, you'll see blues and whites and yellows and all kinds of crazy stuff. And there'll be a vary of species depending on kind of what they look like actually when they're growing in the pond there. They'll form those mats. Can be foams, can be scums, can be slicks. A lot of times it'll look like, someone came in and just dumped a bunch of old paint, because you have all those different colors that a lot of times will come hand in hand with that. But they thrive in very warm, very nutrient-rich water over our region here. So again, kind of touching on, we have a lot of farmland influence, especially in Warren County there. Which unfortunately just shoots up those nutrient levels for a lot of these ponds that are getting their inputs from farmland, or again, HOAs that have a lot of lawn fertilizers and all that sort of stuff. You'll see a lot of these issues in those older, definitely more nutrient-rich ponds. And unfortunately, these issues have been getting worse and worse over the past years. I mean, when I started 15 years ago, I could probably count on one hand how many ponds we had with these outbreaks of cyanobacteria blooms. And now I'd say upwards of 95% of the ponds that we manage are dealing with this at some point throughout the season. And that probably has to do with, a little bit of the climate warming in our area here, keeping the season running a little bit longer. We're seeing more intense heat. And then also just the influence of fertilizers and stuff like that we see kind of in this region here. The biggest here and the problem with this, aside from the look, and it doesn't smell particularly good either, so you have kind of an aesthetic issue there, but the toxicity could potentially be an issue. Not all of these species produce toxins, and they're not toxic all the time, which unfortunately can be a little bit of a headache of trying to figure out when this is potentially an issue. But use your resources. If Warren County Soil and Water can help you with that sort of stuff, great. If we can help you with that, that's great. But those toxins can really become a big issue where you basically can't even use that water body anymore. You don't want to be around it. You obviously don't want to be swimming or drinking that water. You can have issues with pets potentially drinking that water and getting very sick. We've had, unfortunately, many customers that have had pets that have died from drinking water. I mean, this has killed elephants around the world. I mean, this is no joke. And unfortunately, the more research that they do, the poorer the prognosis looks with potential neurotoxins, even from just being around it and kind of just inhaling this stuff. It can become airborne sometimes. And they've been finding some neurological diseases that are kind of pairing with a lot of these toxins that these cyanobacteria produce. So again, this is no joke, not to really scare everybody like, oh my gosh, my pond is, killing animals and, kids and stuff like that. But more just like as a knowledge base, like this is a thing, be on the lookout, know the signs. And if you start to see it, then start thinking about solutions and reaching out to resources to try to get this fixed. Typical solutions are going to be not a one-stop fix. It's not just going out there and spraying some copper sulfate. It's usually kind of a multi-tiered approach, unfortunately, because these are not super receptive to just using chemical treatments. It's usually going to be a combination of, chemical treatments are definitely part of that, but we got to drop those nutrient levels. We got to address what's flowing through there that we need to start cutting off or diverting or filtering. And then we need to get some water movement in there to kind of break up those blooms, get your oxygen levels higher, to help protect your fish and your wildlife from there. So again, something to think about. It's becoming more and more common. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen these if you're managing either HOAs or properties, or just have a pond in your backyard. But just kind of be cognizant of this, that if you're seeing some of these stuff, probably try to avoid the pond and then reaching out to somebody to start going down the process for mitigating that. Some common weed issues that we see in this area, typically the more common species that we see are going to be pondweeds and then naiads. Whether it's narrowleaf or American pondweed, that top picture there is going to be narrowleaf. The bottom left is your American pondweed, and on the right we have a naiad species there as well. These are native species. These are not the worst things in the world to have. Again, these species may actually help you with a lot of the issues, especially with the harmful algal blooms by, using up some of those nutrients and competing with those species. So if you have some of this vegetation, maybe keeping it contained in certain areas is only going to help you with that sort of thing. So, nutrient filtration for sure, but it's also good habitat for wildlife and especially fish. So typically what we'll do with management of these species is maybe not completely eradicating, but doing some maintenance to keep them pinned in certain areas, and keep them maintained so they don't take over, which they can, and they can be an issue. But typically we don't want full eradication, especially for these native species here.
Hey, real
Yeah,
quick, are
yeah.
you going to speak on maybe the muck removal? We have a question on clay liners, if you
Mhm.
want to take that now, or if you would rather wait till it fits in to the
Uh,
presentation.
Yeah, so I'll be doing a little piece on dredging and stuff like that, and sedimentation and organic loads and stuff like that a little bit. But I mean, if there's a specific question, I'm happy to answer it now.
Okay, I'll read the question. If it sounds like something you're going to cover later, just let us know.
Yeah,
This was
great.
from Michael with MI Homes. Occasionally, the clay liner in their wet basins, and these are pretty deep, 18 to 24 feet deep, the liner leaks and the pond drains down. Sometimes a year or two. Okay, 18 to 24 inches. That's much better. Um, yeah, so occasionally it leaks, the lake drains down, sometimes a year or two in the future from the initial construction. If the pond is a pond liner recommended, when on-site soils are not holding water, any rule of thumb, and he asked about cost per square foot, so more details. Maybe that would be a later follow-up, but let's see.
Ye- Yeah, I mean, we get leakage and seepage issues, and I'm sure you, Travis, and Justin probably take this call a lot. I mean, yeah, I mean, that quality of that soil is important when you're building these basins. You know, you want to have high clay content. So if that's not quite there, you can get some potential leakage and seepage issues, even with, water, table fluctuations and stuff like that. I mean, typically with most ponds, even if everything's perfect, you're going to see, potential loss of water, especially in the summertime, especially in a time of drought. But if you're actually getting, potential, leakage and seepage through there, there are certainly products that you can use, bentonite clay, there's barricade, there's pond seal. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can potentially use to kind of cut down on those issues. I mean, unfortunately, always the issue is, okay, where is it coming from? So you're not having to do like a full liner. I mean, in this area, typically liner, like an actual like rubber liner is usually not necessary because we typically have enough soil or clay content to keep those from leaking. But it could be a possibility if you have really, really porous soils, lots of sand seams and stuff like that, that could potentially be something to go down. But I'd probably want to exhaust other problem or other solutions there first with either lining with bentonite clay, or there's products that you can spray over the surface that sink down and kind of seal that stuff up. So it might be something, if you have something specific, we might want to talk about that potentially afterwards. But I guess in summation, there are solutions that we can do with any, small leakage and seepage issues there. But it would just really depend on the site and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, feel free to reach out to me. We can talk about this potentially separately if it's an ongoing issue with a lot of that sort of stuff. But yes, there are solutions. We can certainly help you with that. Probably, Warren County team they can do soil samples and stuff like that and kind of see what potentially could be the issue. So there are solutions, but it may be a lot more site specific, depending on that soil quality there. Okay. All right, so so we did the weeds here. So now these weeds here, probably may be fairly common for a lot of people here, especially in older ponds. Again, nutrient rich, not a lot of water movement, stuff like that. These are plants that we typically want to eradicate just because of the issue that they cause with complete coverage. Duckweed and watermeal, two species that we see a lot of times in conjunction with each other. Duckweed has, if you see there in that bottom left picture there, has more of a small little clover leaf looking thing. And if you were to pick it up, it has a really tiny little thread root underneath that. And then in comparison, on that right-hand side there with the fingers, that's watermeal. So it doesn't really have a root system, much, much smaller, just kind of like a little tiny little piece of, and you were to roll it in your fingers, it's kind of grainy, like cornmeal or something like that, but bright, bright green. These things replicate like crazy. So again, it's something that we want to probably eradicate. It's not really something you can just kind of keep pinned in and just maintain with either contact herbicides or by mechanically removing it or something like that. Typically with these two species, chemical applications are really going to be your only option. With maybe a couple yeah, these things can very quickly, which becomes a problem for, especially if you're trying to filter this stuff out with nets or something like that. If you even leave a couple pieces of this stuff floating in a corner or something like that, you'll come back the next weekend and it'll be completely covered again. So you're kind of limited in what you can do if you get these sort of species, but typically chemical control is going to be your best bet with that. So these are your more emergent species. So emergent meaning that they're actually growing physically out of the pond, and they're really not growing under that water for the most part. So cattails are the big one. We see those all over the place, every ditch line, every pond, that we see. And these can certainly become to the point where they are extremely problematic. Maybe they're blocking outflows, that could be causing, flooding issues. Maybe they're just growing in areas where they're becoming problematic. They can potentially draw in muskrats. Muskrats will eat the tubers of that plant. So you can see more muskrat activity if you have a lot of cattails around your pond, which again can cause leakage issues and damage around the banks and stuff like that. So lily's another one that we see a lot of times. Both of these species, again, can have their problems. They can spread really fast, and you do have to do some sort of control. But there are positives to them as well, especially with the native species. The native lily is going to be the white one that you see there. If you see any lilies with different colors and stuff with those are typically going to be either more tropical or they're going to be the non-native species. But they can be good for nutrient filtration, especially. Cattails are really good if you get a stand of those, especially the inflow. If you have a lot of that runoff from fertilizers or farmland or ag or something like that, they can help filter out a lot of those nutrients before it hits that water of that pond, and could potentially cause, again, that competition to using up some of those nutrients, so you don't have as bad of algae issues for sure. Same with lilies. I mean, lilies are really good nutrient filters. They're also really good habitat for fish, provide fish cover and stuff like that. So again, positive negatives to both of these species, but mostly you just want to kind of keep an eye on them, make sure they're not getting out of control, maybe do, again, more maintenance instead of eradication with these particular two species there. So when you're talking algae and weed control, you have a couple different avenues you can go down. Typically, you have these three options. So chemical control, biological control, and then mechanical control. And usually, unfortunately, a lot of the times it's not going to be, just select one of these and that's going to be good for you. It's usually kind of an integrated program where you maybe using a combination of all of these, depending on what that site particularly needs, basically. But it's always going to come down to identification. Figure out what the problem is. Googling can get you in a lot of trouble of trying to figure out what you got there. So coming to someone, with that knowledge base that can say, okay, yeah, this is this particular species and this is the avenue you need to go down, whether it's, one of these three or a combination of all of those, basically. So chemical control, by far, probably the most common form that we see. There's a huge industry for, algicides and herbicides in the aquatic industry. Everybody knows of the old school copper sulfate. We hear farmers reach out to us all the time that they've been, getting out there in a boat and filling up a burlap sack full of copper sulfate and just dragging it behind the pond, and that's just served their pond so well for so many years. But there's a lot of better targeted products that are not a little bit more environmentally safe, more targeted, not a lot of waste, not a lot of sediment buildup with a lot of this stuff. So again, knowing what you're doing is extremely important. Not only for the health of the pond, but also for the safety of the person making these applications. And really the surrounding environment. So again, identification is important, and then making sure you're actually getting the right product that you need, and determining those application rates as well. I mean, I've heard so many times of people just not really reading labels or reaching out and just applying crazy amounts of product and then get the repercussion of stuff. So you do have to be, really very careful, or, assist wins out a lot of times, but people on budgets are sometimes trying to do this themselves, so we try to help them as much as we can there. But chemical treatments, it's usually going to be not a one and done. It's going to be a multiple.
Hey, Alex, we're having a bit of a lag here.
Okay, go ahead and. All right, Alex, we have a little bit of a lag, and maybe you could look at your video settings.
He's gone.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. I think our end looks okay, but I think on the other end, they might have some video settings. We'll get Alex back in here as soon as we're able to. And
You might have
yeah,
lost connection.
some good points. So I think we touched on the one with the clay liner. We see, so I think that pond design, the depth, keeping the depth a little deeper, having those banks a little steeper, that may help with some of the things Alex was talking about with the aquatic algae and even the plants. So that's going to keep those down. So that's one idea. We do offer, so when you're looking to site a pond, as I mentioned, we have folks who can come out and look at that, look at the watershed draining into it, maybe look at the soils a little. The good thing is we tend to have soil classes, at least here in the eastern side of Warren County, that tend to be very high in clay. If you're getting down around the Great Miami, you may have problems with sand. It's good for infiltration, but it'd be bad for ponds.
And up in Carlisle area, this is Justin. Carlisle area has a lot of sandy, porous soils, so good for infiltration. And a lot of projects up there. I know Mike Athan here with MI Homes asked the question about, do you need to do a liner in the pond? And, if you're in an area of sandy, gravelly soils like Carlisle, I would say definitely so. But a lot of basins up there, they'll do like infiltration pits as well. So you don't want to hold the water necessarily. But if you're a resident who wants a pond, it's really good to check the soils you have there. Generally speaking, in Southwest Ohio, lots of clay soils. But you still might need some sort of liner or seal, like he mentioned. So those are just things to consider. Doing a soil test on the property and where you place the pond. Probably don't want to put the pond on top of a hill. You need to get water draining to it. So lower on the property. Well, we have a technician here that'll do some pond placement guidance for residents as well and provide some recommendations there. Unfortunately, it looks like we lost Alex. Oh, I think he's back.
Very good.
Alex is back. Yay.
Maybe real quick, we talked about CEUs. I forgot to mention
Yes,
that.
CEUs.
If you would want CEUs,
Mhm.
and this is more the development and engineering community, put your name.
Mhm.
What would they need? Email?
Just give us your name and really all we need is your name and just say yes to that. You need a certificate or not, because usually our urban chats, mostly engineers, development community, but this one more geared towards residents and HOAs. So not all engineers here, but yeah, we'll get you certificates. Looks like Alex is back. You were muted a minute ago, Alex. See if your microphone's on.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
Sounds
okay.
good.
I don't know what happened. Everything just crashed, so I apologize.
It happens,
I'm glad you're back. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
All
can
right.
go a little longer. I don't think we have to,
Right.
1 o'clock doesn't have to be a hard fast point. So
Okay.
I'll go ahead and mute us and you can continue with your presentation.
Okay, perfect. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Just a little technical issue there, but yeah, we'll get back on track here. So, yeah, so that's more of your more chemical control option. Couple different options there as well. So more your biological control. So this can be a multitude of different things going on there. So grass carp for sure. I mean, our company Jones back in the day, Jones Fish. That's where our company started was selling grass carp. We were the first company to start selling grass carp in the state of Ohio, and it continues to grow. So grass carp are technically a non-native species. They're from Asia, China specifically, but we started raising them in the U.S. for vegetation control. They are aggressive vegetation eaters. They'll eat a little bit of algae, submerged weeds, all that sort of stuff. The little caveat there is, since they are non-native, we do have to make sure that they are sterile, so they cannot reproduce and kind of start to take over our river and lake systems around here. It's extremely stringent. We have to get multiple levels of testing to make sure that those fish are sterile and cannot reproduce. And that happens on multiple ends of the process of, from the very beginning of producing these fish to checking those lots as they get stocked and making sure we have documentation, all that sort of stuff. But they are really, really good at vegetation control. Typically, we'll use this in conjunction with other products because they're not usually going to be a silver bullet to be able to solve all of your problems from a vegetation and algae control. But they are a fish that we include just about in every fish stocking that we recommend, just as a really good tool to keep a lot of that vegetation down there. They get really big. I mean, we'll stock them at about 8 to 10 inches, which are about 1-year-old fish. And then within the handful of maybe 5, 6 years, they'll be full grown and they can be pushing, 20, 30, 40 pounds, 3, 4 feet long. So these things do get very, very large. You don't necessarily have to get them out of there after a certain point. They can live a decent amount of time past that. But usually the key with those is just restocking them every once in a while to just make sure you get those younger fish in there. Because as those fish age and they get large, they slow down their eating. They're not as aggressive with that vegetation control. So if you've stocked fish, it's been, 15 plus years since you put them in there, you can start to see some vegetation start to creep back in there that the grass carp were handling before. So yeah, keeping, restocking every 6 to 8 years with some younger fish is always a good idea. Another one, really good one for vegetation control that's been somewhat recent to our industry is tilapia, which again are a non-native species. They're from Africa and the Middle East, but they are extremely aggressive, way more aggressive at eating vegetation and algae than grass carp are. The only really limitation for tilapia is they are tropical fish, so they don't survive our winters here. So you stock those, late May, early June, and then you're going to get a season throughout the summertime of them controlling algae and vegetation in your pond. And then typically we recommend to try to have those all fished out of there by the end of the season. Or if you don't, you're going to have some dead fish there just as that water temperature starts to get down too low. But these fish are great to eat. We usually recommend to stock them and start harvesting them in September. And then, harvest them out, have them in the freezer. You can have fish tacos all winter long, basically. So they're also really good at they reproduce as well. So these are not sterile like your grass carp. They do reproduce, but they actually have a benefit of reproducing because they can help feed your bass and other species in the pond with that reproduction that they produce there. Phosphorus reduction I'll get into a little bit more later in the presentation. And then beneficial bacteria is also something you can throw in these natural bacterial packets that'll help reduce muck. They'll strip out nutrients, they'll help with water clarity, all that sort of stuff. You kind of have to be careful with a lot of these products because you can buy this stuff on Amazon and things like that, which may not be as effective. So again, kind of theme for, I guess, the talk is, make sure you're talking to the experts and know what you're putting in your pond before you just start throwing stuff in there. Or else, for the most part with the bacteria, you're just kind of wasting money. Not really it's going to hurt anything, but you're just kind of maybe throwing in a product that's not going to work super well for your particular situation there. And then third, kind of to your algae weed control is going to be mechanical control. That's, whether it's a small pond that you're throwing a rake out there and digging out algae, or something a lot more aggressive, like this picture of here, this major harvester that we use down south. It can be a multitude of all that sort of stuff. Typically, we'll use these big harvesters in states that have like heavy regulation where maybe you can't use aquatic herbicides and algicides, or there's limitations to them. So really harvesting is going to be like your only option. So Florida does a lot of this, Texas, in the Northeast, they do a lot of harvesting because of those tight regulations that they have on those applications, which is, for better or for worse. I mean, just every, industry is a little bit different there. And then cattail removals too. I mean, you can literally cut these out of here. You can kind of see a before and after picture here of a customer that we did last year. Of kind of all that dead. We came in and did applications throughout the season to kill all that stuff off systemically. And then so that kills all the way through that root, so you're not going to see as much regrowth. And then in the fall, typically we'll come in and do these cutouts where we kind of start with a clean slate there. And then aeration is a mechanical control as well. If you get that water moving with some agitation on the surface, that can help break up a lot of those mats that we see throughout the season there. Nutrient mitigation. So phosphorus is going to be your typical nutrient that we see that's feeding a lot of that algae and weed growth in the pond. It is a nutrient that we need for everything to grow. So it is an important element that we need in our world. The problem is if that those nutrient levels, that phosphorus level starts to creep up and up and up year after year, that's when you're going to start to see a lot more intense blooms. So this phosphorus can come from a lot of stuff, fertilizer runoff, you have septic influence, you have, agricultural runoff from farmland around you. It can come from animal waste, fish waste, leaf debris. I mean, basically anything organic that makes its way in the pond is holding phosphorus and can cause, an increase in those levels. Eutrophication can happen. You kind of see this cycle here in this photo here. So phosphorus comes in, the algae blooms, that algae dies, it sinks to the bottom. The bacteria can use some of that up, it can re-release it. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. Once that phosphorus gets in there, you're going to have to do something to actually get that out of there. Whether it's, physically dredging that out of there, using phosphorus reducers, using aeration, all that sort of stuff. It's kind of a combination of all of that, but it can cause some nasty stuff, excessive growth. Get back to those HABs really cranking through there, can cause oxygen crashes, which can unfortunately lead to potential fish die-offs there. So prevention, that's going to be key. If we can, at the beginning of the implementation, if you're building a pond, what can we do to kind of prevent that sort of stuff? That's going to be super important. So that can be done by, limiting the fertilizer that you're using on your lawn or in your HOA, or, directing your landscape company to maybe using phosphorus-free fertilizers, especially, directly around the pond, which there are laws. They really shouldn't be applying phosphorus right up against a pond. I'm not completely up to date with what those regulations are, but they do have regulations on where phosphorus can be used specifically because of these issues. But also preventing leaf litter and grass clippings from getting in your pond. If you're mowing your lawn, make sure it's directing away from the pond and not shooting right into it. Goose control is a really big one. The waste of the geese is super high in phosphorus. So if you have nesting geese or high populations of geese around the pond, that can shoot up your phosphorus levels extremely fast, and then you're going to have a big time issue. So controlling geese, there's a lot of potential solutions for that. There's not a solid solution where this is going to immediately fix your problem. So it's going to be kind of site specific, but we can certainly help kind of discuss options with goose control there. And then going back to promoting native vegetation, whether that's leaving some of those pond weeds grow or physically planting native vegetation around the edge to kind of suck some of that stuff up, is always going to be key. And then you can do treatments. These natural products that I kind of have listed here, these physically bind with that phosphorus particle and will sink it out of the water column and make it unavailable for algae and weed growth, basically. So long line of different products. This is kind of a somewhat newer element to the industry here. So everybody's starting to get on board with being a little bit more preventative, proactive with these treatments to kind of drop the cause, the cause being the solution being there, excessive algae growth, excessive weed growth. So if we can cut some of these issues, that can cut down on some of those issues in the long run there as well. Kind of a piece of that nutrient reduction is going to be dredging. We get requests for dredging all the time. And, in previous years, we hadn't really had a good option. We kind of have a contractor list that we, kind of send out that say, hey, contact this company that can do some of this mechanical dredging. But we've been playing with this the past couple years, and this year we kind of let it fly live. We have this kind of targeted little mini dredge. It's a great little tool for either smaller ponds or targeted inflow areas. And basically it's a couple pumps on a little floating platform. And it's more or less a little bit of a suction type thing, you know. So you got one hose that's going down that's actually, you know, shooting water into that area to help lift, and then it has a suction element that's pulling it through that pump and sucking that stuff up, and then we'll pump it either onto a specific property, or we'll use dewatering bags that kind of hold it in one specific area, and then it can sit there and we can use that for haul off later. But yeah, it's good for beach areas, leaf debris that, you know, around dock areas, inflow areas, or we've used it for, you know, smaller ponds for a complete dredge and reset there. So here's kind of it in action here. You can kind of see this is Casey here, you know, working kind of that area. Makes kind of a little bit of a big mess in the short term, but that stuff settled down pretty quickly. And then we're pumping it a couple different ways. There on the left, we're pumping it into these dewatering bags, which basically will hold that sediment and that silt and that organic material, but the water flushes all out of there. And then, you know, you allow a little bit of time for that stuff to dry, let all that water completely get out of there, and then you can cut those bags out and haul that material out of there. Or alternatively, if you have an open space or something like that, we can pump that directly onto the property. Most people think it's going to be a big, huge mess, but it actually, if you distribute it properly, it's really not too bad, and you can get that grass to regrow pretty easily there. We also have large-scale dredging operations as well. So this is one of our partners that we paired with. They're based out of the Michigan area, but they do flow through our whole footprint as well, helping us out with a lot of dredging projects. So I'm going to switch to a video. It wasn't working very well on in the presentation here, so I'm going to share just straight from the video here for you. And then we can kind of see this thing in action a little bit here. This is a project up in the Michigan area. This is more sand removal that they use on this big big lake project here. But that's the big hydraulic dredge. Basically has an arm that comes down to the water, and it moves back and forth over that area and slowly pumping that material out of there. And you can see all that hose, which we can pump that up to 5 miles. So we can pump it pretty far to different sites there. You can see how far this material is moving throughout this to a specific area that they wanted that material pumped to. And typically we'll actually dig a containment site with heavy equipment there to actually hold that material that we're pumping there. So you can see here kind of building that containment area there for that stuff to pump. So it's kind of a slip. Actually a pretty simple process for the most part. Obviously equipment's very large, and the pumping capability is pretty aggressive, but it's really a simple process. And you can see there where they're pumping that material directly into that settling pond there, and then that water will eventually flow out of there. And then, you know, you either cap it off typically, or you can haul some of that stuff out depending on the specifics for that site basically. All right, we'll share back to here. So that's a newer capability for us, but that can scale anywhere from, you know, let's say an acre pond to hundreds of acre ponds and lakes in this area. So it kind of just opens up different opportunities. So, you know, if you're having clients and customers that are looking to get into dredging, you know, it can be large scale or small scale that we can certainly help out with. And that gets back to that sedimentation issue, which is, again, the biggest pollutant, you know, for, you know, ponds in this area, which, you know, typically you will have to remove at some point in the lifetime of that pond. And obviously lots of factors of when and why, but yeah, usually that sort of thing is important to remove that material to get back to kind of starting back at zero. All right, and we'll get into fisheries a little bit here. You know, kind of big service offering that we happen here with, you know, game fish stocking. We can help with populations surveys with our electrofishing equipment, where we come in and actually survey what that population balances looks like, and then make recommendations for improvement, supplemental feeding, you know, and mosquito insect control there as well. You know, very common issue for fisheries issues around here is going to be what we call stunted, especially largemouth bass population. Largemouth bass love to reproduce. They're really, really good at it, But the problem is if you don't have the fish to feed those bass, they're just going to keep reproducing and they're not going to have that food source behind them to really support them. So what'll happen is they'll get stunted. So their growth is stunted where they can only get to a certain size. They look really, really skinny. That kind of that top picture there, that bass, you can see kind of that large head, but not a whole lot of body behind that is a pretty typical issue. So really the biggest fish for that is, first of all, get a population survey, kind of see the scale of the issue, where it's coming from. And then typically what you're going to do is you're going to remove a lot of those mid-sized bass. You're going to add habitat, you're going to add forage, all that sort of stuff to kind of rebuild that system there. Kind of just our offerings of what we can stock here. So predators, these species kind of being the trophy game fish that we stock. Most people, if they're building fisheries, are going to be wanting to kind of target for, fishing opportunities for these particular species there. So bass probably being the apex predator there for the most part that most people are looking to do. But, we got hybrid striped bass, channel catfish, black crappie are also super, super common there. The key with the predators is you got to make sure that you have enough food. Again, that stunted bass population, that can all be mitigated by making sure you have that forage base. And these species are going to be what's going to be key for that, building out that forage base there. So bluegill sunfish, big priority there. They reproduce, they're going to be feeding everything with their offspring there. Minnows and shiners also extremely important. We recommend stocking those twice per year, once in the spring, once in the fall at a minimum, to make sure that you have enough of that forage to feed everything in there. So, and these species also help with insect control, swimmer's itch, leeches, grubs, all that sort of stuff too. So again, it's pretty important to have that balance of predator versus prey, or else you're just going to be set up for failure within that fishery. Vegetation control, another part of game fish stocking, kind of touched on that a little bit, so we don't have to go over that since we're a little bit pressed for time. But insect control is a big one that we see a lot of times. So there's actually a fish called a mosquito fish, really, really small, like a little tiny minnow, but they feed on and target mosquito larvae specifically. So if you have a big mosquito issue or midge or something like that issue, stocking some mosquito fish in there will really help with that. But even regular fathead minnows, bluegill will help with that sort of stuff as well. So having a well-balanced natural pond can actually help with a lot of those issues. All right, last chunk that I'm going to get into is kind of your aeration options. Aeration, extremely, extremely important for the health of the pond. Can help prevent, fish kills and turnovers, but also higher oxygen levels increases organic decompositions, which will slow, the need for dredging, as that stuff builds up, higher oxygen levels at the bottom will stimulate natural bacteria, which will help eat that stuff up a little bit more naturally. Typically, you're going to have two different, determinations of aeration. One's going to be surface aerators, which can either be fountains or just plain old surface aerators. And then you're going to have your subsurface diffused aeration as well, which can come in a couple different packages with that as well. But every site's a little bit different, so you're going to want to come to us with kind of determining which is going to be your best for that particular site. Lots of different things involved with that: depth, age of the pond, what are your inflows, what are you looking to achieve, all that sort of stuff. So kind of depends on what you're looking for. First and foremost, I'd say, fountains, big selling item for us, tend to be more decorative for sure. You're not going to be as functional. They're designed to make these really big patterns, so they're moving a good amount of water, but that water is going to be super, super high pressure and less of volume because they're looking to shoot it up or into these multiple patterns. So you're not going to get as much aggressive aeration and agitation on the surface there. So they're not as good for, pond health, pond aeration, that sort of stuff. But they do a little bit of that. But mostly it's going to be a more aesthetic choice for sure. These come in all kinds of different patterns and sizes and manufacturers and all that sort of stuff. So again, kind of using your resources and tools to kind of decide what's going to be your best fit is going to be important in deciding that for sure. Kind of in the middle between, maybe form and function is going to be these V-shaped surface aerators here. So it has a little bit of a pattern, looks nice. You can put LED lights and all that sort of stuff on this unit, but they move a decent amount of water and they have more agitation there. So this is kind of a compromise between the aesthetic look. You have a pattern, but it also moves more water than your traditional fountains that are just more of your decorative pieces there. So a little bit more higher volume there, but they do have still that pressure to kind of throw that up in the air a little bit more. But you can already see with that picture the more agitation that you have kind of on the surface there with that. So again, this is a little bit of more of a compromise. So if you're looking for pond health and aeration, but also want something that looks nice, this is going to be probably the one to go through there. Now, kind of complete function just for the health of the pond, health of the fish, health of the ecosystem, that sort of stuff. These surface aerators called high oxygen transfer units are going to be your best bet. So you can see here how much more aggressive it's moving that water on that surface. And that's going to help with oxygen exchange as that bubble is coming up on the surface. It's grabbing oxygen and pushing it down into that water column, which is going to help, keep your oxygen levels up to help prevent fish kills, help with all those sort of things, that nutrient accumulation, all that sort of stuff. Not as decorative. I still think they look pretty cool. You can put lights on these and they actually look really neat at the night with just kind of a glowing bulb, which is actually really cool. So you can do something a little bit more decorative this, but typically you're going to be more functional for sure. Used commercially, we have one of these in every single one of our production ponds here because how efficient they are of creating oxygen and keeping that overall pond health super, super important. Super low cost. I mean, these sell on the low end, $1,500. Depending on your horsepower, and can go upwards from there. But definitely a lower price point than your fountains for sure. And again, they can help with that agitation. They can help break up algae blooms and stuff like that as well. And then we got your subsurface. So this is diffused aeration. So diffused just meaning that air is getting pumped from a compressor on the shoreline and then forming these tiny, tiny little bubbles on the bottom of the pond there. So the picture here is actually what's sitting on the bottom of the pond. That's a diffuser template, has these like silica stones that's sitting on the bottom there, and it's kind of diffusing these tiny little bubbles that does like this upwelling effect from the bottom there. These technically are not adding oxygen to the pond because it's just pumping air, that's just circulating around us. It's more destratifying the pond. So it's preventing that layering effect that you get. If you've ever swam in a lake or anything like that, if you dip your toe down, you can kind of get to that colder water. That's that layering effect. So you're going to get different temperatures, but you're also getting different oxygen levels throughout there as well, which can become a problem, especially in the summertime. You can have that really big disturbance in that layering effect. And then what can happen is you get a driving rainstorm or something like that. It can invert or mix those layers and can cause an oxygen crash and can lead to a major fish kill there. So these aeration systems are great for keeping everything, temperature, air, oxygen levels all the same. So you can't physically turn that pond over. And it's going to help activate that natural bacteria on the bottom for that sediment and muck accumulation as well. Some limitations with these, really not going to be best to implement in an older pond that already has that organic material on the bottom, because what can happen is that sits on the bottom where all that muck is. It's going to pump all those nutrients and re-release it into that system and can cause an uptick in algae growth or cyanobacteria. Again, could lead to those HABs for sure. So can be used in older systems, but we have to be more aggressive with phosphorus reduction and nutrient reduction in that one. So again, a little bit site specific with that, but definitely a really good option, especially in newer built ponds, definitely. So electric with these, always going to win out. Energy efficient. These operate for pennies on the day, low amp draws. Very discreet. This is just a single diffuser template, but you can build these out in 10 plus diffuser templates. So this can be a really, really large system as well. Really low maintenance on these. These are either going to be rotary vane or piston compressors. So there's a little bit of compressor maintenance that needs to be done over a few years, maybe swapping out some filters and stuff like that occasionally, but way lower maintenance than your surface units in your fountains for prevention of cloggage and stuff like that too. So again, really good option with these, again, especially with newer ponds. They do have a solar option with a lot of this stuff too. You can get them with or without battery backups. So, traditional ones without that battery backup, are only going to be running when the sun is out, which can, again, cause you issues on those cloudy days where maybe that's not running. Definitely more maintenance with these. Way more expensive. Cost has gone down, significantly in just a handful of years, but they still are significantly more expensive than your electric run. So if the electric is available, probably going to lean that way. But if this pond is in the middle of a field, there's no way to get electric, solar is a good option. There's even solar options for fountains and surface aerators as well, but you're going to be more limited on what size you can actually produce with patterns and horsepower and stuff like that as well. So good option if you got no power available, but again, electric is always going to win out with that. Last couple of slides here. So this just got rolled out somewhat recently. So this is what we're going to be offering as a fountain lease program. Basically, you can lease any piece of equipment that we sell, and the benefits of that is, you have a flat fee that you're paying every single year, and this includes all the maintenance. So you don't have to do any of the maintenance yourself. We do the regular maintenance on that. If it's clogged, if there's an issue, we handle all that. We'll winterize the fountain and all that sort of stuff as well. So basically, it's kind of a worry thing. We install it, and then we handle it all for you, basically. The main benefit is if you're buying a fountain, you have that huge potential cost up front where you're paying, let's say you're buying a 5 horsepower fountain, that could be $15,000. That can be really hard for your budget, especially if you're dealing with HOAs and stuff like that. They may not have budgeted for that particular year. What this lease program does is it gives you a flat fee over the span of the lease terms, whether that's most of them they're going to be 3 to 5 years for that. It's the same fee for years back to back, so you can budget for that a lot easier. You're not paying any additional maintenance fees. If you've managed, a fountain before, that service calls can add up super fast with these things. If you're calling us out multiple times per year to clean or maintenance or anything like that, you don't know what those fees will be year to year. So this kind of bundles all that sort of stuff together. We're handling it. So I can see where this can be really good for HOAs, home builders, even backyard homeowners as well. But the big thing is just kind of that flat fee where you're not having fluctuating costs, and you just have, worry-free, maintenance-free unit getting installed there for you. So a big opportunity for especially our algae and weed control service customers. You get a big 15% discount there. So that can really cut down on that cost there if you're kind of bundling both of those programs together there, basically. So certainly happy to discuss potentials for this, but I can see this being a really big win, especially if you're dealing with HOAs and stuff like that for budgeting sake, basically. And last, this is kind of an open invite. We're doing an open house this year we had designed this specifically for, property managers, developers, builders, and stuff like that. We send invites to Soil and Water and stuff like that as well. An educational event. We're going to have stations set up, kind of going over all of our services, something similar to that kind of what I did today. Just kind of with all of our equipment out there, you get to see how we use our equipment, what equipment we use. So it's just going to be a really good condensed way to kind of learn a lot about pond and lake management in this area. And plus you get to come to our hatchery, which is a really beautiful place here. So got a QR code. I can send this out to everybody as well. So feel free to RSVP, for this event. It's going to be, I think, a lot of fun. July 10th there, 4 to 6, kind of more of an open house, but we're going to have booths set up. We're going to have a bunch of employees, again, kind of sharing knowledge with you, explaining our services, explaining why this is important, why that's important. So good opportunity to kind of expand your knowledge kind of on top of, a lot of what I talked about today. So feel free to RSVP. Again, if you're interested in the details of that, you can reach out to me as well. But yeah, feel free to use that QR code if you're interested in RSVP for that event, if you'd like. And that's all I got. So any questions? Happy to answer. Anything anybody's got?
All right. If anyone wants to ask a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask. We have plenty of time. We did have one come across. Let's see. Okay, this came across in the chat. And Scott said, I have a client who wants a wet pond for decorative purposes. Due to various constraints, it can only be 3 to 5 feet deep. Is it worth trying to provide the chemical, biological, mechanical treatments, or should the area just be kept dry and say the wet pond is not a good idea? So really getting at the depth, and that seems pretty shallow. I'll see what Alex's thoughts are on that though.
Yeah, I mean, 3 foot, you're going to be limited. You're not going to be doing like, major game fish stocking with that depth. That's just going to lead to a lot of problems there. That doesn't mean that you can't, have that system. What I would probably recommend is, making sure that you're designing it, knowing that it's not going to be like a perfect pond situation. You're probably going to want to do some native plantings and stuff around there. But yeah, you're definitely with that amount of depth. If you only got 3 feet throughout, you're going to have sunlight penetration through that entire bottom of that pond. So you're going to have more algae issues, more weed issues. So you're definitely going to need some combination of preventative actions with, nutrient mitigation, as well as like plant filters and stuff like that. But you're definitely going to need some sort of chemical applications to keep that as that stuff develops. So it's definitely possible. I'm happy to discuss specifics on that one for sure. It's probably going to depend on size and where it sits and all that sort of stuff, but it is certainly possible. I mean, think about like water gardens and stuff like that. I mean, koi and goldfish ponds. I mean, those are small and super shallow, and if you design them correctly, they can be done. But yeah, it's going to be very specific, but it's doable. You're just going to have to kind of get a plan together before you start just digging a hole, basically.
All right, we have a question here. And Justin.
Alex, Justin here. In terms of dredging, pond dredging, we get calls from residents, HOA sometimes, and do we need to dredge it yet? And really you need to test the depth, I think. But generally speaking, how often would you say a pond would need dredged? 10 years, 20 years?
Yeah, it varies greatly, unfortunately, which is an annoying answer, I know. But yeah, I mean, it just depends on, the inflow, what you got going on there, what's actually flowing in. If you're sitting up on a hill, you don't have a lot of inflow, it may not need to be dredged for many, many years. But I would say typically it's worth checking in, at that 10-year, that 15-year mark. And probably it's best to do, like depth and muck surveys on a somewhat regular basis at that point to kind of see where you're at, how quickly that's accumulating, and kind of make a designation from there for sure. And dredging is one piece of that. I mean, there's biological dredging you could do with products and stuff like that. So again, very site specific, but not a great timeline. But I'd say you probably want to start thinking about at least monitoring it at probably the 10 to 15-year mark for sure.
Okay. Then second part to that is when you do dredge it, um, we've heard it's expensive to truck that dredge material off site, the shipping, the freight cost for that. And can they work it into the landscape? Is it high in nutrient content? Can you work it into planted areas, garden areas or something like that? Or where would you recommend that folks could spoil this dredge material? Or should they truck it off site?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, trucking it, you're right. I mean, that shoots up the cost maybe double, because there's unfortunately soil testing and stuff like that that you're going to have to do to make sure there's no contaminants and things like that. So, yeah, it really, really adds to the cost if you're looking to haul that off site. There's lots of stuff you can do with it. Yeah, I mean, if you're using like those dewatering bags, you can place that in a place, and you can even just leave it there and eventually, plant plants and stuff like in there and, as like a berm or something like that. Yeah, I mean, you can use it for, gardening and, fertilizer and stuff like that. You would want to maybe do some soil testing on it. Sometimes it's too hot. It's too nutrient dense to just be throwing it, in your gardens and stuff like that. It may end up actually harming a lot of that stuff. And again, if the pond has been used, for chemical treatments and stuff like that over the years, especially with like copper sulfate, that copper can build up in the sediments and cause you some issues as well with that. So you'd want to
Okay.
probably do some sort of soil testing to kind of see what that looks like first before you go using it. But there's a great multitude of ways that you can use that stuff. A lot of our customers that we've done a lot of these dredgings for, they will use it on site. They'll basically pile that stuff up and then they'll turn it over and then use it on their property for either just like fill dirt or, in their gardens, or they'll spread it on their fields even. But again, you kind of want to do a little bit of research before you just start spreading that stuff willy-nilly.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right. I had one quick question. You talked about the aerators, the surface aerators. The last one you showed was really aggressive and looked great for oxygenation of the water. What about, will that also help keep the pond from stratifying? Or do you have to have that bottom diffuser?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, so it can, if the pond is more shallow, that can probably draw down like 5 or 6 feet deep. So you can get some destratification with that more mechanical movement for sure. But if you're definitely pushing, deeper than 6, certainly 8, 10, 12 feet, you're not going to get that destratification with that unit. So, maybe the bottom base diffused system in conjunction with the surface aerator is probably going to be your best bet. Again, depending on the age and the muck quantities and stuff like that, that'll help kind of decide where you want to go. But yeah, I mean, you can't really, with those surface aerators, even if you're not completely destratifying, you're still very, very unlikely that you're going to have a turnover event. I mean, we use those units as if somebody calls us that says they're having a turnover event, we're going to run out one of those surface aerators out there, and it shuts down that turnover event almost immediately because of just the oxygen creation. It just spikes the dissolved oxygen in that water column so quickly. So destratification becomes less of an issue. And again, it depends on what you're looking to achieve. If destratification is like your main concern, that probably the diffused aeration is going to be the way to go. And you can use that in conjunction with that surface area for those alternative options as well.
All right, great. I don't see any more questions. Again, if anyone has one, but otherwise, I want to thank Alex. I want to thank everyone who attended. Seemed like people stayed tuned in, so a good topic that people are interested in. And maybe if we did record, it will be on our page and also our YouTube channel. You can find other urban chats also on that channel, and we'll have another one coming up probably fall later in the year. So stay tuned for that. And Alex, you can reach out to him or maybe go down to the open house that they're having. I think that's July 10th and in the evening. I know there's a little ice cream place around the corner. It might just be a fun outing. Go down, check out Jones, and yeah, thanks again. Unless anyone has anything, we'll go ahead and end the meeting here. So, and feel free to reach out to us too if you have any questions, or Alex. And we're the Warren County Soil and Water Conservation District. So thanks again from Travis, Justin, and everyone here. And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.